Every night, a small puppy curled up outside the entrance of the town hospital, braving the cold and loneliness. When Dr. Thomas finally noticed the little dog's unwavering presence and discovered the heartbreaking reason behind it, he was left shaken. What sorrowful truth had tethered this tiny creature to the hospital doors? It was a bitterly cold winter evening, and the golden glow of the hospital lights reflected off the icy pavement. Patients and visitors bustled in and out, wrapped in thick coats and scarves, eager to escape the chill. But amid the movement, one figure remained still, a small shivering puppy with dull matted fur and weary eyes. He lay curled just outside the revolving doors, his frail body resisting the bitter wind. He didn't seek warmth, nor did he scavenge for food. His attention never wavered from the entrance as though he were waiting for someone. Dr. Thomas Walker, a seasoned pediatrician known for his structured and logical approach, stepped out of the hospital that evening, tightening his scarf against the cold. His eyes caught sight of the motionless pup, and something in his stance made Thomas pause. "Why is he here?" he murmured to himself, his brow furrowing. A passing nurse, catching his gaze, sighed softly. "He's been here every evening for weeks, doctor. Poor thing must be waiting for someone inside." Thomas's frown deepened. Waiting for someone? His eyes lingered on the fragile creature, a rare pang of concern piercing through his usually disciplined demeanor. The dog's deep, solemn gaze seemed to hold a story of devotion and sorrow, though Thomas couldn't yet understand it. The following night, as he left the hospital once again, Thomas found himself instinctively searching for the puppy. Sure enough, the little one was there, his small frame trembling against the cold as snowflakes dusted his fur. Yet he remained unwavering, his watchful eyes locked onto the hospital doors. Thomas hesitated. He wasn't someone who got involved with animals. His world was one of schedules, diagnoses, and responsibilities. But this dog, small and frail as he was, tugged at something deep within him. Slowly he stepped closer, crouching down a few feet away. "Still here, huh?" he said softly, his breath forming a mist in the freezing air. The puppy barely reacted, only lifting his head slightly, his ears twitching. His gaze met Thomas's, and for a fleeting moment, the doctor felt something unfamiliar, a quiet sadness that stirred in his chest. "You waiting for someone?" Thomas asked, though he already suspected the answer. The puppy didn't move, but his deep eyes seemed to whisper an unspoken truth. A janitor sweeping the front steps chuckled at the sight. "Talkin' to that mutt again, Doc?" he teased. "Been here for weeks now. Some folks say he's waitin' for someone, a patient maybe." Thomas turned his gaze back to the hospital, a strange unease settling over him. Could the dog's owner be inside? Or worse, had they already left, never to return? Over the next few nights, Thomas found himself drawn to the puppy. Each evening as he left the hospital, he spotted the small figure curled up in the same spot. He never whined, never begged, just sat there waiting. One particularly cold evening, unable to bear the sight of the shivering pup, Thomas brought a small blanket from his car. Kneeling beside him, he carefully draped it over his tiny frame. "Here, this should help," he murmured. To his surprise, the puppy accepted it without protest. He didn't run, didn't cower, just shifted slightly, his eyes flickering up to meet Thomas's with brief, quiet trust before returning to their usual watchful state. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The image of the dog haunted him. He was a doctor, trained to save lives, to help those in need. But outside his very own hospital doors, this small life was slipping through the cracks. The next morning, determined, he approached the front desk. "Has anyone reported a missing dog?" he asked the receptionist. She shook her head, typing into her system. "Not that I know of, doctor." "You think he belongs to someone here?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "Maybe. Let me know if anyone asks about him." By the end of the week, his curiosity had turned into something deeper, a sense of responsibility. He began leaving food and water for the puppy, pleased to find the bowls empty each morning. But despite these gestures, the little dog remained distant, his loyalty tethered to the hospital doors. One evening, as Thomas sat in his car, he watched the pup from a distance. "Why won't you leave?" he whispered, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't frustration he felt, it was helplessness. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. Everything changed one weekend. As Thomas approached the entrance, he noticed a small crowd of nurses gathered around the puppy. One of them, a kind-hearted woman named Sarah, was gently stroking his head. "He finally let someone touch him," she said, smiling as Thomas arrived. "It's like he's starting to trust us." Thomas knelt down beside them, his hand hovering just above the dog's fur. "Is that true, buddy?" Are you warming up to us? Slowly, cautiously he reached out. His fingers brushed against the matted coat, and the puppy didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted his head, his eyes full of a mixture of hope and deep sadness. At that moment, Thomas knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. He had to find out the truth. The next morning, Thomas arrived early, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't just a case of loyalty, but something more. He approached Sarah with a plan. We need to do more, he told her. That dog isn't here by accident. Sarah studied him, then nodded. I have a friend at the animal shelter. They can check if he's chipped. That evening, Sarah brought a leash and gently coaxed the puppy into following her. To their surprise, he allowed it, his small body trembling but compliant. Thomas felt guilt tighten in his chest. He didn't want to frighten the dog, but this was necessary. At the shelter, a technician scanned him for a microchip. Nothing. He's not registered anywhere, the technician said, frowning. Thomas clenched his jaw. So what now? We could post his photo online, Sarah suggested. See if anyone recognizes him. The shelter staff agreed, snapping a picture and sharing it across community boards. If this dog had an owner, someone would come forward. But days passed, and no one did. One evening, as Thomas sat beside the dog outside the hospital, he sighed. You know, I never thought much about loyalty until I met you. He chuckled softly. You're a better listener than most of my colleagues. The dog tilted his head as if listening. The next day, an elderly patient in the waiting area caught Thomas's attention. That dog reminds me of a story I once heard, she murmured. About a dog who waited for his owner at a train station for years, after he passed away. Thomas stiffened. Could that be the case here? Determined, he and Sarah searched hospital records for any patient who might have owned the dog. Hours passed until Sarah gasped. Dr. Walker, look at this. A file. An elderly man named Edward Langley. Admitted 3 weeks ago. No next of kin. Passed away shortly after. Thomas's stomach dropped. Could it be? That night, Thomas sat beside the dog once again. He whispered the name aloud. Edward Langley. The puppy's ears twitched. Thomas's breath caught. Thomas's breath caught. Was he your person? The dog didn't move. But something in his eyes changed. And in that moment Thomas knew. This little soul had been waiting. Waiting for someone who would never return. And he wasn't leaving, because he didn't know how. For the first time, Thomas reached out fully and stroked the dog's fur. The puppy leaned into his touch, seeking the warmth he had lost. You're not alone anymore, Thomas whispered. I'll make sure of that. Edward was always reserved, but his loyalty was unmatched. He kept to himself, yet those who knew him spoke of his unwavering devotion. Did he have a dog? Thomas asked. The woman's expression softened, a nostalgic smile appearing. Oh yes, a small brown one with the most soulful eyes. That little dog followed Edward everywhere. You'd never see one without the other. Thomas's heart clenched. Do you know what happened to him after Edward passed? She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I assumed he ran off. Poor thing must have been lost without Edward. Thomas turned his gaze toward the hospital in the distance. He's been waiting outside for weeks. The woman gasped, her eyes widening. He's still there? Oh, that dog adored Edward. If he's waiting, it's because he doesn't understand. He thinks Edward is coming back. Back at the hospital, Thomas shared what he had learned with Sarah. It all makes sense now, he said, pacing the break room. The dog wasn't just abandoned, he's mourning. Sarah nodded solemnly. But what now? He can't stay outside forever. Thomas exhaled deeply. I don't know yet. But I feel responsible. Edward's gone and he has no one else. Sarah gave him a knowing smile. You're attached to him, aren't you? Thomas sighed. I suppose I am. He's been through too much. I can't just walk away. That evening he knelt beside the dog, leash in hand. Hey buddy, he murmured, his voice gentle. Come with me. I'll take care of you. The dog hesitated, his tail wagging uncertainly. But slowly he allowed Thomas to slip the leash on. For the first time the little dog followed, not to a shelter but to a home. At home, Thomas set up a small bed in the corner of the living room, placing fresh food and water nearby. The dog sniffed around cautiously before settling in. It's not the hospital, Thomas said softly, kneeling beside him. But I hope you feel safe here. Over the next few days the dog grew more comfortable. He followed Thomas from room to room, his trust growing little by little. For the first time in years, Thomas felt his house was no longer just a place, it was becoming a home. But the peace didn't last. One evening as Thomas was finishing dinner, He noticed the dog sitting by the door, tail wagging anxiously. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked. The dog whined softly, pawing at the door. Thomas frowned and opened it, expecting him to step into the yard. Instead, the dog turned, looking back at Thomas with pleading eyes before trotting toward the street. He paused, waiting. He wanted Thomas to follow. Intrigued, Thomas grabbed his coat and followed the little dog through winding alleys and across intersections. Finally, they arrived at a quiet park on the outskirts of town. "What are we doing here?" Thomas murmured, breath visible in the cold night air. The dog barked softly and trotted ahead. Under a street lamp sat an old wooden bench. On it lay a single envelope, Edward Langley's name scrawled across the front. Thomas's breath caught. He picked it up, fingers trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter, ink smudged in places but still legible. The opening words sent chills through him. "My dearest companion, if you're reading this, it means I've left this world. But I need you to know how much you meant to me." Thomas read the letter aloud, voice shaking. It was Edward's farewell, written not to a person but to his beloved dog. A final message of gratitude, love, and an unfulfilled wish for the dog to find happiness after he was gone. By the time Thomas finished reading, tears were streaming down his face. The little dog sat quietly beside him, head resting on his knee, as if understanding the weight of the words. "He loved you so much," Thomas whispered, stroking his fur. "And I promise to honor that love." The weight of Edward's final words followed Thomas home. The dog curled up in the passenger seat, silent and trusting. The letter had confirmed what Thomas already knew. This wasn't just a stray. This was a soul left behind, searching for something he'd never find. Back home, Thomas carefully placed the letter on the mantel. He brewed a cup of tea, hoping to soothe his thoughts. The dog sat by his feet, tail tapping lightly against the floor. "You really are something special," Thomas murmured, scratching behind his ears. "I don't think I've met anyone more loyal than you." The dog tilted his head as if listening and let out a soft whimper. Thomas chuckled. All right, I get it. You're hungry." Days passed and Thomas noticed a shift within himself. His work had always been his purpose, but now, for the first time, he had something beyond the hospital. Taking care of the dog became a part of his daily life. Morning walks, shared meals, quiet evenings on the couch. He found himself calling him Max, a name that seemed to fit his quiet resilience. But Max's grief still lingered. Some nights he would sit by the door, staring into the distance. Waiting. Hoping. There were moments when Thomas saw the sorrow in Max's eyes, especially when a car passed by, making his ears perk up with hope, only to lower in disappointment. One night, while working on paperwork, Thomas noticed Max pacing restlessly. "What's wrong, buddy?" Max barked once, then trotted to the counter where Edward's letter rested. He pawed at it, looking up at Thomas. "You miss him, don't you?" Thomas whispered. "I can't bring Edward back, but I promise to take care of you." Max licked his hand, tail wagging faintly. Thomas took it as a sign of trust. But something still gnawed at him. Why had Edward's last days been so lonely? What had happened in the moments leading up to his passing? Driven by curiosity, Thomas returned to the hospital, reviewing Edward's file. His heart clenched as he read. Edward had been sick for months but had kept it hidden. His last days were spent in solitude. His only companion had been Max. Thomas shared his findings with Sarah, who listened with a heavy heart. "That poor man," she murmured. "And that poor dog. He wasn't just loyal, he was grieving." Thomas exhaled, his resolve hardening. "I want to do something for them. Edward and Max deserve more than this ending." Sarah smiled. "You already are, Thomas. You've given Max a second chance. And I think Edward would have wanted that." Determined to honor Edward's memory, Thomas reached out to his neighbor. Together, they planned a small memorial in Edward's favorite park. Word spread, and soon neighbors and acquaintances gathered, bringing flowers, sharing stories, even donating to a local shelter in Edward's name. On the day of the memorial, Thomas brought Max to the park. He sat quietly by Thomas's side as if understanding. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he held Edward's letter in his hands. "Edward may be gone," he began, voice steady despite the emotion swelling in his chest. "But his love and loyalty live on in Max. This little dog is proof of the kind of man Edward was. Someone who gave everything even in his last days." The crowd murmured in agreement, warmth spreading through them. Thomas looked down at Max, eyes filled with quiet promise. "I promise to take care of him," he continued, voice firm. "To honor Edward's memory by giving Max the life he deserves." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas felt a sense of closure. The gathering wasn't just for Edward, it was for Max too. A final goodbye. A new beginning. That night as they returned home, Max curled beside Thomas on the couch, finally at peace. Thomas framed Edward's letter and placed it on the mantel. It wasn't just paper. It was a testament to love, loyalty, and the silent promise of a new future. Their conversation took an unexpected turn when Clara revealed something Thomas hadn't known. Edward had been trying to reconnect with her during his final months. He had left messages, sent letters, and even attempted to visit her home. But I was too afraid to answer, Clara admitted, her voice heavy with regret. I thought it was too late. Hearing this, Thomas felt a surge of determination. It's not too late to honor his memory, he said. You can help me take care of Max and make sure Edward's story isn't forgotten. Clara nodded, her resolve strengthening. I want to make things right. For Edward and for Max. As Clara and Thomas began to work together, new challenges emerged. Clara suggested visiting Edward's old home to retrieve any items he might have left behind for Max. Since Edward's hospitalization, the house had remained untouched. The idea of going through his belongings was daunting, but they both knew it was necessary. The visit to Edward's home was emotional. The small, cluttered house held the echoes of a man who had lived simply yet deeply. Max immediately recognized the space, wagging his tail as he sniffed the familiar surroundings. The living room contained a worn-out blanket that Max seemed particularly attached to. Clara folded it gently, her hands trembling with emotion. In a drawer near the kitchen, Thomas discovered a small wooden box filled with letters and old photographs. Among them was a journal Edward had kept during his illness. As Thomas flipped through the pages, he was struck by the depth of Edward's love for Max. This dog saved me, one entry read. He gave me a reason to keep going even when I wanted to give up. The journal also contained an unexpected revelation. Edward had been planning to establish a fund to support local animal shelters. He had hoped to leave behind something meaningful, but his illness had progressed too quickly. Thomas shared this discovery with Clara, who immediately latched onto the idea. We have to make this happen, she said firmly. It's what Edward would have wanted. But making Edward's dream a reality wasn't going to be easy. Thomas and Clara reached out to local shelters and organizations, pitching the idea of a memorial fund in Edward's name. At first they faced skepticism. Some shelters were hesitant, while others lacked the resources to participate. However, Thomas's passion for the project eventually won people over. Max became the face of their campaign, his story touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. A photograph of Max sitting beside Edward's framed letter became the campaign's symbol. Donations began pouring in, from neighbors, hospital staff, and even strangers moved by Edward's story. As the fund grew, Thomas noticed a change in Clara. The guilt and sadness that had weighed her down started to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. She began volunteering at a local shelter, working with dogs that reminded her of Max. Thomas, too, felt a renewed sense of fulfillment. Balancing his work at the hospital with his commitment to Edward's cause wasn't easy, but every time he saw Max wagging his tail, he knew it was worth it. As the memorial fund gained momentum, Thomas and Clara spent more time together. Their shared mission to honor Edward deepened their bond, but it also forced them to confront unresolved emotions. One afternoon, Thomas suggested something he believed would help Clara find closure: visiting the hospital where Edward had spent his final days. Clara hesitated, clearly uneasy. I don't know if I can face it, she admitted. You don't have to do it alone, Thomas reassured her. Max and I will be right there with you. She glanced at Max, who wagged his tail as if encouraging her. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, let's do it. At the hospital, Thomas led Clara through the sterile halls to Edward's former room. The scent of antiseptic and the hushed murmur of nurses brought back memories for Thomas, but he focused on Clara, whose hands trembled as she stood outside the door. This is it, Thomas said softly. Clara hesitated before pushing the door open. The room was empty, but traces of Edward's presence remained: a framed photo of Max by the bed, a stack of books, and the faint scent of lavender. Clara stepped inside, her composure crumbling as she picked up the photograph. He really loved you, didn't he? She whispered, kneeling beside Max. The little dog wagged his tail and licked her hand as if offering comfort. Thomas watched in silence, giving her the space she needed. After a long moment, Clara stood, wiping her eyes. Thank you for bringing me here, she said. I needed this. As they left the hospital, Clara finally opened up about her deepest regret. I wasted so much time being angry, she confessed. And for what? A misunderstanding? A few dollars from our parents' estate? It all seems so meaningless now. Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Regret can be heavy, he said. But what you're doing now is what matters. Clara offered a small, sad smile. I just hope it's enough. The memorial fund was beginning to attract attention beyond their town. A local news outlet reached out, wanting to feature Max's story in a segment about the healing power of animals. Holmes was hesitant, not wanting to exploit Max, but Clara saw it as an opportunity to expand Edward's legacy. This could help so many shelters, she argued. It's what Edward would have wanted. Reluctantly, Thomas agreed. The interview was scheduled, and on the day of the shoot, Max charmed everyone on set. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Donations increased, and people across the state reached out, touched by Edward's story. Despite their success, Thomas found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't fully processed. Caring for Max had filled a void in his life, but it also forced him to confront his own loneliness. One evening as he sat on the couch, Clara arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small box. I thought you might want this, she said, handing it to him. Inside, Thomas found Edward's letters, photographs, and dog training guides. At the bottom was a letter addressed to whoever takes care of Max. As Thomas read Edward's heartfelt words, a lump formed in his throat. Thomas was hesitant, not wanting to exploit Max, but Clara saw it as an opportunity to expand Edward's legacy. This could help so many shelters, she argued. It's what Edward would have wanted. Reluctantly, Thomas agreed. The interview was scheduled, and on the day of the shoot, Max charmed everyone on set. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Donations increased, and people across the state reached out, touched by Edward's story. Despite their success, Thomas found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't fully processed. Caring for Max had filled a void in his life, but it also forced him to confront his own loneliness. One evening as he sat on the couch, Clara arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small box. I thought you might want this, she said, handing it to him. Inside, Thomas found Edward's letters, photographs, and dog training guides. At the bottom was a letter addressed to whoever takes care of Max. As Thomas read Edward's heartfelt words, a lump formed in his throat. He trusted you, Clara said softly. Thomas exhaled shakily. I've been struggling. I wonder if I'm doing this for Max or for myself. Clara placed a hand on his arm. You're honoring Edward in the best way possible. That's not selfish. That's love. Her words resonated deeply. For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to embrace the bond he had formed with Max, not as a way to fill his own emptiness, but as a tribute to Edward's unwavering love. The Memorial Fund's success brought unexpected challenges. With Max's story gaining nationwide attention, the shelter was inundated with adoption applications and corporate sponsorships. One day, a sharply dressed man named Gerald Parker arrived with an offer. Max would become the face of a national pet adoption campaign. Thomas hesitated. Max isn't a brand. He's family. Gerald leaned forward. This isn't exploitation. It's about impact. Think of the lives Max could change. Clara was torn. This could fund shelters for years, she pointed out. But Thomas was reluctant. He's been through enough. I won't turn him into a commodity. Their argument grew tense. Clara accused Thomas of holding back out of fear. Thomas questioned if Clara truly understood what Max meant to him. But as the tension thickened, Max whimpered, nudging Thomas's leg. The simple gesture broke the silence. Clara exhaled. Maybe we're too close to this. The next day, a new revelation shifted everything. A young vet technician, Elena, approached Thomas with a surprising detail. Edward had dreamed of starting a mobile veterinary clinic to help underserved communities. He never mentioned this, Thomas murmured. Elena smiled. He wanted to help people and their pets. Max inspired him. The idea struck a chord. Instead of a media campaign, could this be the best way to honor Edward? As Thomas and Clara began researching the possibility of a mobile clinic, strange things started happening. Unfamiliar faces loitered near the shelter. One evening, Thomas found a note slipped under the door. Max doesn't belong to you. Alarmed, he showed it to Clara. Her expression darkened. Do you think someone's claiming him? Max's past had resurfaced like a ghost, and now Thomas and Clara were caught in the storm. The fabricated ownership claims had turned into a full-blown legal nightmare, dragging them into court proceedings that threatened to strip Max from the only family he had left. Gerald Parker, ever the opportunist, capitalized on the scandal, twisting the public narrative to fuel his campaign. His advertisements, splashed across social media and local news, subtly suggested that Max's true home was still in question. The community was divided. Some stood by Thomas and Clara, while others wavered, their trust eroded by relentless media speculation. Clara paced the shelter's office one late evening, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What if we lose him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The fear in her eyes was undeniable. Thomas, seated at his cluttered desk, reached down and ran his fingers through Max's fur. The dog, ever faithful, lay beside him, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. "We won't," Thomas murmured. "Edward believed in us. We'll fight for Max the way he would have." His words were firm, but even he couldn't shake the gnawing dread that settled deep in his gut. As the court date loomed closer, the weight of the case bore down on them. Every hour spent preparing legal arguments and gathering evidence felt like time stolen from Max. The shelter, once a place of warmth and safety, now felt like the front line of an invisible war. Samantha had proven to be an invaluable ally, offering to testify on their behalf. Her knowledge of Edward's unwavering love for Max would serve as powerful testimony, but Thomas knew they needed something more, something irrefutable. Then the unexpected happened. Late one evening, a courier arrived at the shelter with an envelope marked confidential. Thomas tore it open, his heart hammering against his ribs. Inside he found a typed letter and several documents, emails, receipts, internal memos. As his eyes scanned the pages, his breath caught. "This?" Clara's voice trembled as she read over his shoulder. "This is proof. Someone inside Gerald's camp is leaking information." The letter detailed a dark revelation. Gerald's team had orchestrated the entire lawsuit, fabricating ownership claims and falsifying legal documents to sabotage their efforts. The goal was clear: discredit Thomas and Clara, dismantle their credibility, and seize control of Max's narrative for profit. "But how do we know it's real?" Clara asked, gripping the papers like a lifeline. Thomas studied the evidence. The emails contained names, dates, and incriminating exchanges that were far too detailed to be a hoax. "We'll have to verify it," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "But if this is legitimate, we have what we need to expose him." The following morning they presented the evidence to their lawyer, who immediately recognized its weight. "This isn't just about saving Max," she said, flipping through the damning documents. "This could dismantle Gerald's entire operation." The courtroom was packed when the hearing began. The tension was thick, the air electric with anticipation. Thomas and Clara sat with their legal team, Max resting at their feet, his presence a silent testament to their cause. Gerald sat on the opposite side, his confident smirk unwavering. The judge examined the new evidence carefully, his expression unreadable. When questioned about the legitimacy of the ownership claims, Gerald dodged, offering rehearsed answers that did little to hide the growing unease in his posture. Then the tide shifted. Samantha took the stand. Her voice, steady but emotional, painted a vivid picture of Max's journey, from his early days with her family, to Edward's unwavering love, and finally to the shelter that had become his true home. Her words held weight, carrying the undeniable truth of Max's history. "Max isn't just a dog," she concluded, her voice breaking slightly. "He's a symbol of hope, of resilience. And no amount of legal battles will change that." Some in the audience wiped away tears. Even the judge's stern demeanor softened as Samantha's testimony settled over the room. Then came the final blow. The lawyer presented the leaked evidence against Gerald's team. Emails exchanged between marketing executives revealed the calculated effort to manufacture the ownership claims. Screenshots of falsified legal documents left no room for doubt. Gerald's lawyer stammered, attempting to dispute the claims, but the damage was done. The judge delivered his ruling swiftly. The fabricated ownership claims were dismissed, and legal action was set in motion against Gerald's team for fraudulent activity. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. News cameras flashed as Thomas knelt beside Max, rubbing behind his ears. "You're safe now," he murmured. The little dog wagged his tail, pressing against him as if he, too, understood that the nightmare was over. Clara turned to Thomas, a triumphant smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face. "We did it." Thomas exhaled, the weight of weeks of fear and uncertainty finally lifting. Edward would be proud. As the sun set on the courthouse steps, Max sat between them, his head held high. He wasn't just a symbol of hope anymore, he was home. Max belonged with the people who honored Edward's legacy, and the judge's decision was swift. The fabricated claims were dismissed, and Gerald's campaign was publicly discredited. Outside the courthouse, Thomas, Clara, and Samantha embraced as reporters swarmed them with questions. "Max is staying where he belongs," Thomas declared, his voice steady despite the emotional toll of the battle. "And Edward's dream lives on." Though the legal victory brought relief, their struggles were far from over. Gerald's disgrace left ripples of mistrust in the community, making many question how such deception had occurred. Determined to restore faith in their mission, Thomas and Clara decided to host a large-scale event to officially launch the mobile clinic. It would be their chance to reaffirm their commitment to Edward's vision and celebrate the community's role in making it a reality. In the days leading up to the event, tension simmered as remnants of Gerald's influence lingered. Anonymous threats and attempts to discredit their work continued, but Thomas and Clara refused to be deterred. Instead, they focused their energy on preparing for the launch, enlisting volunteers and spreading the word about the clinic's mission. On the morning of the event, Max seemed to embody the resilience that had defined their journey. His presence drew children and adults alike, his wagging tail and gentle demeanor bringing smiles to everyone he encountered. Thomas couldn't help but think of Edward and how proud he would have been to see this moment unfold. The event attracted a larger crowd than expected. Local news outlets covered the story, and the shelter's social media pages were flooded with messages of support. Thomas and Clara stood side by side as they unveiled the clinic, a sleek, customized vehicle adorned with Edward's favorite quote, "Every animal deserves a second chance and every person deserves the joy they bring." As the crowd erupted in applause, Thomas felt a wave of emotion. This wasn't just the culmination of their efforts, it was a testament to the power of community, perseverance, and the bond between humans and animals. Yet amidst the celebration, an unsettling question remained: how would Gerald respond to his public disgrace? Thomas and Clara knew they couldn't let their guard down, especially with the clinic's future at stake. Though Gerald had seemingly disappeared, they anticipated his retaliation. True to their fears, he wasn't about to fade into obscurity. In the days following his courtroom defeat, Gerald launched a smear campaign, using his remaining influence to sow doubt about the shelter and the mobile clinic. Online, anonymous accounts began posting accusations, claiming the shelter mishandled funds, fabricated Max's adoption story, and exploited the community for personal gain. Gerald's allies placed inflammatory ads in local newspapers, reigniting skepticism among those who hadn't fully embraced Thomas and Clara's vision. "His network runs deeper than we thought," Clara muttered one evening, scrolling through an avalanche of false accusations. "If we let this fester, it could undo everything we've worked for." Thomas nodded grimly. "We can't fight him in the shadows," he said. "We need to bring everything into the open and force him to answer for his lies." To counter Gerald's tactics, Thomas and Clara organized a town hall meeting, inviting the community to hear the full story of Max, the mobile clinic, and Edward's legacy. They also planned to present irrefutable evidence of Gerald's manipulations, hoping to turn the tide of public opinion once and for all. Samantha volunteered to help, using her connections to spread the word. "If we show them who Gerald really is," she said firmly, "they'll see the truth for themselves." On the night of the town hall, the venue was packed with concerned citizens, reporters, and local leaders. Gerald Parker himself arrived, flanked by a few remaining loyalists. His smug demeanor suggested he still believed he could win. Thomas took the stage first, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. He spoke of Edward's dream, the sacrifices he had made, and the impact the shelter had on countless animals and families. Clara followed, detailing the struggles they had faced, including Gerald's relentless attacks. "Everything we've built has been for the animals and the community," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But there are those who would tear it all down for their own personal gain." When Samantha took the stage, she revealed the insider documents exposing Gerald's fabrications. She displayed email exchanges, financial records, and testimonies from whistleblowers who had worked with him. Gasps rippled through the audience as the extent of his deceit came to light. "This isn't just about Max," Samantha concluded. "It's about standing up to corruption and protecting what's right." Gerald stood abruptly, his face red with anger. "This is nothing but a smear job against me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "You can't prove half of this nonsense." Thomas calmly stepped forward, holding up the court's dismissal of Gerald's fabricated claims. "We already did," he said firmly. "The court saw through your lies, and now the community does too." The room fell silent before erupting into applause. Gerald's supporters murmured amongst themselves, some quietly slipping out the door. The event had achieved its purpose. Gerald had been exposed. Still, in one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, he held a press conference the following day, claiming he was the victim of a conspiracy. His accusations, however, fell on deaf ears. His credibility was shattered, and his audience dwindled to a few loyalists. Meanwhile, support for the shelter surged. Donations poured in, volunteers flocked to help, and the community rallied around Edward's vision. The mobile clinic, once met with skepticism, had become a beacon of resilience and hope. Even as they celebrated their victory, Thomas and Clara knew the fight wasn't over. The battle had drained them emotionally and physically. One evening, as they sat on the shelter's porch, Max lying contentedly at their feet, Clara voiced the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. Thomas stared out at the horizon, the fading light casting a warm glow over the shelter. "Gerald's influence is fading," he said. "But people like him don't give up easily. We need to stay vigilant." Clara nodded, resting her hand on Max's head. "At least we have each other. And Max." Thomas smiled, feeling a little lighter. "And Edward's dream," he added. "No matter what comes next, we'll keep it alive." Despite Gerald Parker's retreat into obscurity, the fallout from his schemes left lasting challenges. Some members of the community still harbored doubts, remnants of his smear campaign. The mobile clinic faced resistance from local policymakers, some of whom had once supported Gerald. Thomas and Clara knew they had won a battle, but trust and stability were still fragile. To rebuild faith, they intensified their efforts. Weekly open houses at the shelter showcased their work, while mobile clinic visits to underserved neighborhoods became community events. Max, the heart of their story, played a crucial role, breaking down barriers with his gentle presence. But the tipping point came in an unexpected crisis, one that would test their shelter, their mission, and their resolve like never before. One stormy evening, Clara received an urgent call from Samantha. A nearby industrial site had reported a chemical spill, forcing mass evacuations. Reports came in of stray animals trapped in the flood zone, their lives at risk as toxic waters rose. "We need to act fast," Samantha urged. "The authorities are overwhelmed. They can't focus on the animals." Thomas and Clara sprang into action, rallying their team and preparing the mobile clinic for its most critical mission yet. Volunteers loaded crates, medical supplies, and equipment, while Clara coordinated with emergency responders. As they arrived at the evacuation zone, chaos unfolded before them. Flooded streets, frightened animals stranded on rooftops and in abandoned buildings. With unwavering determination, Thomas guided the rescue effort. Through the harrowing night, their team saved dozens of animals. Max, sensing the urgency, became an active participant, encouraging the frightened creatures with his presence. As dawn broke, the shelter overflowed with rescued animals, their medical needs met by the mobile clinic. News of their heroic efforts spread, further cementing their legacy. Edward's dream had not only survived the storm, it had grown into something even greater. As the courtroom doors swung open, the weight of the verdict settled heavily over Gerald Parker. His once confident stride was now a defeated shuffle, his carefully crafted facade of righteousness shattered. The judge had dismissed his fraudulent case within hours, ruling in favor of Thomas and Clara. Adding insult to injury, Gerald was ordered to pay the shelter's legal fees, a final, humiliating blow. Outside, a crowd of reporters eagerly captured his downfall, their questions sharp and relentless. Meanwhile, at the shelter, the news spread quickly, and a wave of relief washed over Thomas and Clara. Their battle had finally reached its rightful conclusion. Sitting on the shelter's porch that evening, Max curled at their feet, Thomas and Clara took a long breath, reflecting on their journey. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Thomas murmured, his voice carrying a quiet sense of awe. Clara glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "From losing Edward to fighting Gerald, to finally making Edward's dream a reality," she replied. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Max raised his head, sensing the significance of the moment. His warm brown eyes, filled with quiet understanding, reflected the love that had carried them through it all. The shelter had become more than just a sanctuary for animals. It had grown into a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of unwavering compassion. One bright afternoon, the courtyard buzzed with excitement as volunteers, supporters, and the animals they had saved came together to celebrate their recent triumphs. Thomas stood before the crowd, his voice filled with conviction. "This isn't just a celebration of what we've accomplished, it's a testament to what we can achieve together. We are more than a shelter. We are a family. A community. A lifeline. Clara, standing beside him, wiped away a tear as the crowd erupted into cheers. Among the sea of grateful faces, a familiar figure emerged. Lisa, the woman whose puppy had been saved during the storm. Clutching a bouquet of flowers, she hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. The crowd parted and Thomas and Clara moved to greet her. I just wanted to thank you, Lisa said, her voice trembling with emotion. If it hadn't been for you, my little Daisy wouldn't be alive today. Thomas met her gaze with a reassuring smile. We were just doing what needed to be done. Lisa knelt down to Max, stroking his fur with gentle reverence. And you're a hero. The simple words carried profound weight, reminding everyone of the lives they had touched. Later that evening, as the celebration quieted, Clara turned to Thomas with an air of mystery. There's something I want to show you. She led him to the mobile clinic, now parked at the edge of the courtyard. Inside, the space had been transformed. The walls were adorned with photographs of the rescued animals, heartfelt letters from their new families, and at the very center, a framed portrait of Edward. This is our tribute to him, Clara whispered. Everything we've built, everything we've overcome, it's all because of him. Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd be proud. Just then, a commotion at the shelter's entrance drew their attention. A group of children, accompanied by a teacher, approached carrying handmade signs that read, "Thank you," and "Heroes of the Storm." They had heard about Max's story and wanted to express their gratitude. One little boy stepped forward, his small hands clutching a drawing of Max. "He's my favorite hero," he said shyly. Thomas knelt to accept the drawing, his heart swelling. "He's mine too," he replied, ruffling Max's ears. The moment was a reminder that their work had rippled far beyond the shelter's walls, touching lives in ways they hadn't imagined. As the shelter settled into its new chapter, Clara and Thomas found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. We've come full circle, Clara mused as she ran her fingers through Max's fur. From nearly losing everything, to building something stronger than we ever imagined. Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. And it's just the beginning, he murmured. There's still so much more we can do. Max let out a content sigh, resting his head on Clara's lap, a silent affirmation that they were exactly where they were meant to be. That night, as they sat on the porch, Clara's phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "Thomas," she breathed, excitement lacing her voice. "We just got an invitation from a national animal welfare organization. They want us to be part of a new initiative." Thomas took the phone, scanning the details. A slow smile spread across his face. "It's perfect," he said. "Edward's dream, it's about to reach even further." Their victory was not just in overcoming Gerald's deception, but in proving that kindness and perseverance could triumph against even the darkest challenges. The shelter had become more than they had ever dreamed. It was a beacon of hope, a place where every animal had a chance at a new life, where people came together not just to rescue but to heal. And at the heart of it all was Max, the dog who had once waited outside the hospital, now at the center of something extraordinary. In the days that followed, the shelter's impact only grew. More volunteers joined their mission. More animals found loving homes. Schools invited them to educate children on the importance of kindness toward animals. Clara led a new initiative, taking Max to classrooms where children eagerly listened to his story, their young minds shaped by his unwavering loyalty. Meanwhile, Thomas expanded the shelter's reach into rural communities, ensuring no animal in need was forgotten. One evening, as the sun set behind the newly renovated shelter, Clara and Thomas sat side by side, Max curled between them. "Do you think Edward ever imagined all this?" Clara asked softly. Thomas gazed out at the glowing windows of the shelter, at the home they had built not just for animals, but for people searching for connection. "I think he did," he said. "And I think he'd be proud." The next morning they unveiled the new sign above the shelter's entrance, Edward's Haven, a shelter of hope. Beneath it an inscription read, "In memory of Edward, whose dream lives on in every life we touch." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers carrying a promise that this was only the beginning. As Thomas stood before them, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "This isn't just a shelter," he told the crowd. "It's a testament to love, resilience, and the power of community. Every life we save is a reminder of what we can achieve together." The shelter's journey had not been an easy one, but it had been worth every battle, every hardship, every moment of doubt. And so, as their story continued, it was no longer just Edward's dream, it was a shared mission. One that Clara, Thomas, and Max carried forward, one life at a time. If you were inspired by this journey, join us in making a difference. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and hope. And don't miss our next story, another incredible journey that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of compassion. Click here to watch now.